Hello, everyone. Welcome to a special bonus episode. If you're here with us at Sex Ed with DB, I know that you're going to love this episode of Lez Hang Out. In this episode, hosts Ellie and Lee, two lesbians on opposite coasts, talk all about consent with Dr. Avgi Saketopoulou. We've been talking about consent on Sex Ed with DB back since episode 4, season 1, episode 4. And this queer-centered conversation adds so much that we don't hear nearly enough. When we think about difficult consent conversations, we usually think about the struggles many of us have had with cis men. But what happens if cis men are literally never part of the conversation in the first place? Listen as Dr. Saketopoulou gets nerdy about the actual psychological science behind talking about consent when you have trauma around consent, when you have a changing identity, or let's face it, zero good examples of what this looks like in queer relationships. Take a listen and be sure to subscribe to Lez Hang Out, linked in the show notes. And please mind the content warning at the start of the episode.
Let's hang out. Let's hang out. And let's talk about what Lezin's about. Let's hang out. And let's listen to two lesbians shout. Let's hang out. Let's hang out.
Hey, Let's Hang Out listeners. We really enjoyed talking to Avgi today, but we just wanted to let you know that as part of our discussion, Avgi shares stories of times when clients experienced events outside of their consent, including in sexual situations. So we want to give everyone a heads up before starting the episode. But we hope you enjoy our conversation.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to Lez Hang Out, the podcast where what do you say to taking chances? What do you say to jumping off the
I was
edge?
Not expecting
You weren't
that
ready
at
for some
all.
Celine. I know.
At all.
I know.
At
No
all.
one was ready for Celine in this episode. But I was. I was ready. I was going with the risk theme and I think it was going to work for me. So that's what I landed on.
Sorry, give me 1 second. Did you find? Okay, yeah. So, sorry, Jana thought she
What's
lost the
Jana
cat.
doing?
She thought she lost the cat. So,
Don't
like,
lose the cat.
I was actually just thinking that.
I'm
That's
so
very lesbian.
No, you're good.
Okay,
I thought
sorry.
you were going to be like, she's spackling again. Stop it.
No. Sorry, she's like, where's the cat? And the pure panic in her eyes, I was like, I need to see if he's okay. So sorry about that. That's a very gay
Okay.
way to start
It's
a
good.
podcast. My
I'm going.
girlfriend thought she lost the cat.
Shall I dive us back in?
Yeah, I'm so sorry.
From the West Coast, I'm Lee Holmes Foster.
And from the East Coast, I'm Ellie Brigida. To those of you who have been with us through this whole journey, thank you as always for listening. If you're a new listener, welcome. We're excited to have you here. Here's what's happening this week.
This week in the Lesdom.
This Week in the Lesdom is a place where we can touch base each episode about things going on with the podcast or otherwise. We want to remind you all that our Trova trip to Croatia is coming up in September. We have 13 spots already filled, which means there are 5 left. You can sign up at bit.ly/LesDoCroatia. The last day to sign up is July 23rd.
We also want to remind everyone in season 6, we are releasing monthly bonus Patreon episodes, and it is that day for our next one to release. So if you want to go up, our 9th episode is available for our patrons right now on Loving Annabelle.
We had a time.
We're also very excited to say that it is our first Patreon episode with a guest. We had our friend Abby Nissenbaum join us to share all of the thoughts on Loving Annabelle. So if you want to have access to that and all of our other bonus episodes, you can join our Patreon at any level at bit.ly/LesPatreon.
In the greater Les universe, this trailer was wild. The Ultimatum Queer Love trailer just came out
Oh, man.
from Netflix. First of all, Lee, you know the premise of the show.
Oh, yes.
So the first season, I was like, this is the most fucked up premise. I will never watch this show. This is so messed up. And now that it's gay, like, I'm in. I'm watching it. I'm like,
Of course you are.
who would ever
Of course
watch
you
this
are.
show? It's so horrible. And so the premise is, right, these queer people have been together. One of them gives an ultimatum. Either you put a ring on my finger or we are breaking up. And then they basically are like meeting new people each week and like dating other people. It's going to be chaos. But some of my favorite gay parts of the trailer were when somebody said, if you don't like my dog, get the fuck out. And another one literally said, I wanted you to propose to me, but you fell in love with someone else in a week and a half.
In a week and a half. The show, like, I am of two minds about this because part of me is like, oh my God, like, we just need some healthy queer representation for like the little baby gays out there. And the other part of me is remembering the absolute fucking ball that we had watching, what was the other reality show?
Are You the One?
Are You the One? I'm like, yes, give me all
Please.
of the gay chaos. Like, I am here for it, and I will enjoy this. I know it. I'm gonna hate it, but I will enjoy it. So there's that.
Also, another funny thing about it is Joanna Garcia Swisher is the host, and like everyone's like, why? Like, there's so many
there's no gay person they can
like
find.
there's no queer, like, she's like straight and religious, and we're like, are they trying to be like, hey, straight people, look, we got a straight religious host for you? Like, no straight people are watching this show.
They're like, did you love Reba and also want to see something else?
Yeah, like, you should.
This
makes no sense to me. Is she trying to like revamp her image? Like, did she say something homophobic? I don't know. I don't know.
Amazing.
Crazy.
Also in the Greater Lez universe, I guess, there's a new movie. Well, I mean, it feels relevant, even though I don't think it's actually gay, right?
It seems a little should have been gay.
It seems a little should have been gay. So Angelina Jolie and Halle Berry are going to be in a new like spy v spy thriller something movie. I don't super know what it's about. I
don't care. Give it to me.
I super don't care. All the gays are excited anyways. Listen, it is the first thing that flashed in my head when I read this. Like, wait a minute. Remember when Mr. and Mrs. Smith came out and everyone was like, so sexy, so hot, sparks are flying. And I'm like, are we going to get that but with Halle Berry now? Because
yes,
I'm in, like, sold. Yeah, give it to me. Great. So that's going to happen, and we'll just, we'll see where it lands on the should have been gay scale for us. I anticipate high. Also, I hear that Pedro Pascal is going to be in what's being billed as a lesbian road trip movie directed by Ethan Coen. So I also know very little about this. It's called Drive Away Dolls. I know Beanie Feldstein's going to be in it.
Love that.
Matt Damon's going to be in it.
Is Matt Damon playing a lesbian?
Pedro Pascal might be.
I hope he does.
I hope he does too. So I don't know. That's the news that's been going around this week, and that it's funny that Pedro Pascal's casting announcement is the first I have heard of this lesbian road trip movie. I was like, okay,
Pedro Pascal, ally to all lesbians.
Ally, yeah, for sure.
That's what's happening this week. Back to you, Ellie and Lee.
Thanks, Ellie and Lee. We are so excited to bring you episode 18 of season 6. Queering Consent, and we are joined by a very special guest today. We have Avgi Saketopoulou, who is a queer psychoanalyst, professor at New York University, and also the author of Sexuality Beyond Consent, Risk, Race, and Traumatophilia. I should have asked how to say that word, too. Is that correct?
That's right.
Okay.
Traumatophilia.
Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you for inviting me.
So excited to talk about this. We already said this before we were on air, but I will say this now. 2 of our good friends, Lauren and Nicole, interviewed you on Coming Out Pod. So we're very excited that we get to do the same.
Yeah, I had so much fun with them. I look forward to this today.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit. I'm sure you've gotten sort of like a pitch down of the book now. Give us like a quick overview of the book to kind of kick us off for anyone who hasn't heard of it or isn't familiar with what it's about.
The book is has a bunch of different things going on with it, but I'm going to start with like one of the main themes of the book, which is consent. So I started out writing this book because I'm a psychoanalyst. I work with people. I see a lot of queer people in my practice. And between the queer patients I work with and also some of the experiences that I see kind of like in the general culture, it's become very clear, I think, to many of us that the ways that we think about consent just doesn't work. Kind of like this notion of affirmative consent where kind of like you negotiate, you have good communication, and at least so the promise goes, if you do that well, kind of like a good sexual contact or a good sexual encounter can follow. But that leaves out a lot of how things work, including the fact that consent, and this is one of the points that I'm trying to make in my book, including the fact that consent is not necessarily only about negotiating with another person, but also has a lot to do with what you will allow yourself to experience, what kind of risks you will take with yourself. And queerness and risk have a lot of adjacencies. So I've been interested in risk for a very long time. So I start with trying to map a different way of thinking about consent, which I call limit consent, which has less to do with trying to patrol one's borders and more to do with what happens when one kind of like throws oneself into experience, when one begins to take risks, not with the other person's boundaries, but with one's own boundaries, which is not necessarily the way we usually think about consent. Usually we understand it as an interpersonal negotiation. I start from there and like proceed to explore a number of different topics, some of which we may talk about today. One of them being like what technically in the book I call perversion, and I will call perversion here too, to speak about sexualities that are not necessarily pathological, but which kind of like play with affects and experiences that we don't usually understand as sexual, like disgust or humiliation, or kind of like racial debasement, which is one of the topics in the book that I talk about quite a bit. And more generally, sexualities that are brushing up against trauma.
There's a lot in there. But my first question to you is from towards the beginning of what you said, which is, you said how we talk about consent isn't working, or like something like that. Like, what to you isn't working? What doesn't work?
Well, consent, at least the way that we think about consent, like say through the Me Too movement, which has made it possible, if not shown us how necessary it is to be able to think about boundaries and the respect of boundaries. But at the same time, that way of understanding what consensual negotiations mean begins to set up this, what I think is really a fantasy, that if you and I are beginning to like try to figure out how we're going to have, say, an erotic encounter, the fantasy goes, you ask me what I want, I tell you what I don't want. Like, I have full access to myself, to what will activate me, to what will be exciting. I communicate that to you. And then the two of us play kind of like sexually within these limits. But the fact is that psychic life doesn't work like that. It doesn't necessarily apply that what we discuss now will come to materialize to be true in like half an hour from now, or even 2 minutes from now. And kind of like how one gets both triggered, but also like excited, or kind of like having experiences that are not necessarily about being a good and safe experience, but an experience that ushers in something new. Like transformational experiences are not guaranteed by safety. Something else makes transformational experiences happen.
Do you feel like that's, I'm just like thinking about this, do you feel like that's like more strangers versus partners? Do you know what I mean? Where it's like, you think about, I don't know, even thinking about like the first time you might have kissed someone and like they didn't know it was coming. That was not really consented to in the definition of what you're saying of consent. But there's something exciting about not knowing that the thing is going to happen. That's sort of what you're talking about here.
In part, I'm talking about that. Like in your example, like part of what is exciting is that something happens that is not something that you have necessarily like controlled or anticipated, and it happens and it brings a certain kind of thrill and a frisson that you didn't quite expect. But there's also like other kinds of experiences. I'm not talking just about sexual experiences in the sense of like having sex or having a sexual encounter. I'm also talking about certain encounters with art that can feel extremely, can stun us, can like really throw us for a loop, where you may become obsessed with a piece of art, or become really preoccupied with a movie or with film or with a piece of theater. Like in the book, I talk about having become quite preoccupied with a theatrical piece. And in many ways, things that we become transfixed about happen in what I've come to describe as they're at the border of our consent. I'm not talking about consent that is violated, where you say, I don't want to do that, and somebody's pushing you to do that. But I am talking about things that are at the border of where you sense that something is happening, you sense that you might be willing to experience something, and it opens up to a space of something that is unexpected. Maybe you have a good kiss, maybe you have a terrible kiss, maybe you have a kiss that reminds you of some really bad experience. We have become so preoccupied in a way that is extremely neoliberal and very kind of like organized around specific, especially in thinking about queerness. Like there are ways in which, in trying to protect ourselves and provide safe spaces to shield queer people from homophobia, transphobia, kind of like all of these problematic conditions, there are ways in which I think we have sold ourselves short and have over promised and have over required safety, even in experiences with each other or experiences with people where something new might arise. So one of the arguments that I'm really interested in the book is kind of like what happens when you dare experiment and innovate and invent outside of the conditions of safety. And that's kind of what I'm playing with in the book.
Yeah, that's so interesting too. This idea, like, I wish I had written it. I wish I could write faster. You had said something about like safety not guaranteeing like a certain type of experience or something. And I think that like it's so interesting because I know you talk a lot in the book about sort of, you know, like as you're saying, like the overlap between a lot of these things with the idea of queerness, right? Or and the experience of queerness and of a lot of queer people. And there's something that jumped out at me about that, because I feel like most queer people, I mean, again, like we always hesitate to say like all, right? But like, I think most queer people can relate to the idea of like at a certain point, like you had to come out, you had to make what wasn't the safe choice, right? Like we're all sort of familiar with the idea of like growing up in a very heteronormative, heterocentric society, in a patriarchal society, right? And of having to make a choice at some point to say like, actually what I want isn't the safe thing, right? Like, and granted, I mean that's doing that in the context of like, I'm choosing for myself to a certain extent, but I think that there's something that like almost immediately like jumps out at me about that concept of like safety not being the be all and end all, I think, for queer people, like from the get-go, right? Like step one of your gay journey is is like letting go of some of that idea of safety and like and stepping outside already of norms and of expectations and you know, like of sort of all of that. So I think that like there's immediately things that I think, you know, it probably jump out, I think, to a lot of queer folks of saying like, oh, yes, yes, I can hear something that I'm relating to in that idea, like, you know, regardless of I think everything else that we're probably about to dive into as well.
No, that's a great jumping point, because I mean, what you're bringing up already situates us beyond the domain of like just feeling safe and comfortable. So there's already kind of like built into queerness a preparedness to confront some things that will be difficult. But here's where I think it gets tricky. I think in the effort to own these kinds of experiences and these kinds of desires and to step into one's queerness, part of what happens, I think not infrequently, is one lets go of kind of like one branch of safety and swings over to another branch. And that other branch is the how to be queer, like what is a respectable queer desire, kind of like, and we can talk about like respectability politics, we can talk about homonormativity, transnormativity. So it's not like we kind of like let go of our investments to safety and just expose ourselves completely. Like we substitute for different forms of safety. So one thing that I should kind of like make very clear is that part of what I'm speaking about is not just kind of like taking risks so that you actually live your true self or that you actually engage with your desire in the way that you need to. I'm talking even more so than that. I'm stretching this even further than that to say that there are so many ways in which we are told and taught that experiences that are overwhelming are not good for you. Therefore, kind of like you can take risks, you can experiment, but if it becomes too much, you need to stop. And in this book, I'm interested about experiences that actually feel overwhelming and which can feel crushing, not necessarily in the sense of like feeling crushed and damaged, but crushing of what you think you understand about yourself, crushing your identity, crushing your sense of like, oh, I thought I wanted this, but now I am before something that actually startles me about myself. And that's not exactly something that one can consent to or anticipate ahead of time. That's why I'm in a way going after consent with such passion, because if you're going to go after experiences of that sort, you're in a different domain.
Yes. Yeah. No, and it's, I mean, again, I'm I feel like I should come with like a PSA on this episode, because I know you talked to Lauren and Nicole, and I know like Lauren and I say a lot that like we are both like very vanilla people. So I feel like we always, yes. I'm gonna like I'm easing my way in. I'm gonna ease my way in. And because something else that like immediately jumped out at me, Ellie, when you were talking about just the idea, just even from like a very bare bones like starting point of like kissing someone without like asking permission first, right?
You've never done that.
And I feel like
I'm just kidding. You're gonna say you always ask.
I have a signed consent form. Yeah. No.
Yeah.
I know, but I think what immediately like, and again, maybe this is just because you and I are like giant like media representation nerds and we have our favorites, and you know, everyone listening knows what our favorites are. Some of you probably have already clocked where I'm going with this, but I will walk you through, Avgi, in case you're not familiar with it. The immediate thing that it brought up, and I think it's a very, again, this is like the vanilla level of where we're going to start. We'll work our way down. I'm thinking of, there's a show that came out a couple of years ago that we are huge fans of. It's called Teenage Bounty Hunters. This is where you never knew I was going to end up like 10 minutes into this episode, Ellie. But there's just, and it's the scene, I'm using this one particular scene, but I think it's a really common scene in queer media, because we talk all the time about like coming out depictions in media, right? And how it's like, it's very overdone. I think this is a very common scenario to see played out on our screens. And I think it's getting at this, starting to work our way at this idea of what you're talking about. You have two girls, one of them, like, they are both ostensibly straight, one of them maybe coming to some self-realizations, right? Goes in for the kiss, and the other one having that moment of being like again, a situation I would never have consented to. I would never have like been open to this, but now it has happened to me and is maybe triggering some of this destruction of my sense of self and opening myself up to something new that I hadn't been ready for, that I wouldn't have accepted, that if you had like asked me, I would have been like, absolutely not, I am straight, what are you talking about, right? But I think that like, again, even at a very like, you know, we're not getting deep into the sexual weeds of like kink play and consent and like BDSM, and like you don't even have to get to that level yet. Like just at a very starting point of like this idea that there are things that can change your relationship to yourself that maybe you wouldn't have been ready for, right? Like I think that's kind of, this is like an inroad to what you're saying. Yeah.
Yes. I appreciate like the slow entry.
This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna take my time. Okay, I'm gonna go slow.
No, I think this is a great example, and let me actually use this example and stay with this kind of like seemingly very vanilla example, but which what I would like to suggest is that this is a very, very interesting and complicated moment, because you have a number of different possibilities. One possibility is that these two people are queer. One of them knows it, the other one doesn't know it. Like she gets kissed and she's like, oh my God, me too. Here I am. Let's go for it, right? So she discovers something about herself that was already there. But another possibility is that there's something about the kiss that actually arouses a desire that might actually have not been there to begin with. And then all of a sudden it precipitates a different kind of crisis. And the crisis might have the sort of like, wait a minute, like, I didn't know. It doesn't have to be the crisis like, oh my God, I'm gay, even though that too could happen. It could also be the crisis of like, oh, wow, like, what is going on? Like, I had no idea. Like, why did I want this kiss? Did I just get turned on? Is this about this person? Is this about my identity? Like, it can precipitate all kinds of questions. So in some sense, part of what, in the second example, part of what we see is that consent is not just about kind of like, do you know yourself? Do you communicate well enough? things arise in an encounter with another. And by the time they arise, it's already too late. But not the too late of violation, but the too late of your own relationship to yourself. And it is that strange time component, that strange temporality, that that's actually, I think, queer time. That's how queer time works. It's kind of like, it's always too late. And it's either too early or too late.
In literally everything for queer people.
No, I don't think
queers only exist in the past and the future, never in the future.
Right now.
Exactly. I mean, I'm thinking of the work of Catherine von Stockton, who writes about the queer child, that the queer child grows up sideways, is the phrasing that she uses to say that it's only retroactively that you can recognize something that may have been there, right? So there's something about time that is not linear. And affirmative consent wants linear time. You know it, there's time A, there's time B. I think what happens with queer time, which is not just the time of queers, but also like the kind of like the strangeness of psychic time, is that it doesn't always happen. You can't always predict it, and it doesn't always happen in real at the real moment.
Yeah. It's so interesting to talk about it that way, because I feel like, something we talk obviously a lot about on the show is like how much of queer people's childhoods to like our own childhoods, I feel like you have them twice, right? There's like the childhood as you live it, and then there's the childhood as you look back on it and everything makes more sense to you. That like they're not the same, right? Like they're not the same thing. Like my childhood looking back will never be what my childhood was when I was living it, because I didn't know so many things at the time that I know now,
Yeah.
And so it's like there's something, I love that idea of like queer time, like it's not a linear thing, and it's not always happening as it's happening. Some of it's happening after it's happened. But it's happening again because you're going back to it, and like that's so true.
It's weird though. It's like when I was learning how to skateboard, I didn't know I was gay. That's weird.
Weird.
Okay, but you know what? Like, I think actually what you were just describing, Lee, about kind of like you have like two versions of your childhood. I would say you actually have more than two. Like, because let's say, so you come out as a lesbian, and you look back and you're like, oh my God, it was all there. And then you come out, you're like, well, I'm actually more on the butch end of things. Then other things get rewritten. Then you decide you're going to be on T. Maybe you will transition, maybe you won't, maybe you're non-binary, maybe now you're identified as trans masc. Now you have yet a different version of your childhood. Yeah. So there's something about these kinds of like rewritings, which are kind of like, I think that those of us who are queer kind of like can resonate with them very quickly. Like, oh yeah, I know that. Like, even skateboarding feels different if you think of yourself as, right? Even in that respect. But I think that they also have some resonances outside of queer experience, but queerness has a certain kind of adjacency to them. Like it's more porous to them. It's more raw. And therefore, like, I think it's much more familiar to us.
But that's, that what you're just saying too, it also opens up a whole bunch of stuff too about like just this idea that like a lot of our life, I think, is about somehow rewriting our history and our paths that like got us here, because it's also like something else that's bringing up, and just because I know it is something else that you talk about in the book that we might talk about as well, is like as someone with two young children, right? Like so much of becoming a parent and having and raising children is that same process, and like it's not necessarily related to queerness, but it's a lot of like revisiting your childhood and re-examining and relearning and re-talking about all of these things. And I think the reason that I think that's interesting in this context, in terms of how it relates to this discussion, is actually twofold. One of them because I know you have a chapter in the book where you talk about some of the consent and playing around consent that kids do sort of naturally, but also because I think you talk a lot about trauma, and I think a lot of like, re-examining our childhood is really about examining our own trauma, whether it's big T trauma or little T trauma, whatever it is. Like, I don't think anyone comes out of their life without any
unscathed.
trauma.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of that sense of trying to figure out like how do you relate to your own trauma and to your own childhood and all of that.
Yeah. I mean, in some ways, I'm gonna go in a bit nerdy here for a moment, if you'll allow me.
Please.
So this is an idea that I want to like flesh out that comes from psychoanalytic thinking, and it's the idea of it's called afterwardsness, and it's the following idea. So we were just talking about like how you kind of like you, for example, transition. You look back on your childhood, and then it makes sense in a different way. But let's stay with your example Lee, about being a parent. So you are in a certain kind of engagement with your children, and then you come to realize that things that happened in your childhood that you have taken as a given, you would never do with your children. Mm-hmm. And now something that has looked normal to you all your life, or just how things were, like the air we breathe, now all of a sudden begins to look more sinister, or it begins to look, and now though the facts of your life have not changed, now something that you have lived with all your life and it has not felt traumatic now begins to feel traumatic. So here is this like odd situation where the event happened then. The trauma didn't happen then. It's happening now as you are realizing something. But it's also not accurate to say that the trauma is a trauma of the moment, because it has to do with this past event that did not feel traumatic then. So psychoanalysis introduces like this very odd way to think about time, which is that contrary to like thinking kind of like from a judicial perspective, or thinking from let's adjudicate, like, was this wrong or not? What happened to you in your childhood may have been wrong all along, but that does not mean that it was traumatic. If it becomes traumatic when you're a parent, then it becomes harder to pin down whether you were traumatized then or whether you're traumatized now, right? So trauma begins to become this kind of like a really weird animal. It's a different kind of trauma than I was 10 and my dad used to beat me and I was traumatized then, right? This is different. So what I also become very curious about in the book is how we relate to trauma. One of the big arguments in the book is we have this fantasy we tell each other socially, relationally, and also clinically, like we train our students and practice as if trauma can be healed, like repair the repair of trauma, the healing of trauma, the working through. And the truth is, trauma is not possible to heal. Nobody has ever healed trauma. Nobody has ever been returned to where they were before they were traumatized. So then the question becomes, what are we telling each other? And what are we doing when we're imagining and putting in these kind of like selling, I think, basically snake oil, when we are promising healing? So this is a very challenging argument, right? It's a very challenging argument because it can sound pretty pessimistic to some people, even though, of course, what I'm not trying to say, like, if you're traumatized, that's it, that it's going to be like that forever. But I am trying to say that there's a way in which we're very afraid of trauma, as if once you're traumatized, the only thing that you can hope for is repair. And
but I think I totally get what I think I understand the concept of what you're saying, especially in the sense of like, you don't undo it, right? Like it doesn't unhappen. It doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a lot of like the concept of what we think about as repair is really just learning how to relate to it differently, right? Like how to incorporate it as a thing that is just a part of you, that is a thing that has happened, right? But you're totally right. I mean, it doesn't like disappear. It doesn't take an eraser, right, and like scratch it out. It's still there. It's just
so. I think that's interesting. So when you say we just learned how to incorporate it in what? Like, what do you have in mind?
Well, I feel like this is going to be a weird episode for me in some ways if we like dive into this.
Yeah, I was like, are we in a therapy session for you right now?
It will be a therapy session. No, but I think because for me, so much of this right now, like the most prominent way that all of this is like, you know, involved in my own life right now has to do with being a parent, right? Like it has to do with that sense of like of exactly what you said, of like examining things that you're like, oh, this happened when I was a kid, and like I would never I would never want to do that to my kids, right? And so it's like it's a lot of, and doing that like while you're still maintaining a relationship with your own parents and like you know, and having them around your kids. And so it's like there's a lot of that like I think for me personally, I mean just in terms of that question, like that tends to be a the most relevant thing. But I also think that like the thing that I found really interesting in terms of like that, some of the sections related to this in the book that I think are interesting to talk about as well, is like this idea that like kids relate to consent very different. I mean, just for anyone who has young children, I think understands that like consent when you're talking about like with children is like a totally different beast than like how we as adults, and especially as like, you know, like progressive liberal adults like tend to think about consent these days. Is very different.
Yeah, that's very true. That's very true. And there's an example from the book that I can share about that, which I think may be what you have in mind. But let me quickly go back to kind of like your idea that, you know, we don't get over trauma, we incorporate it. And I definitely, I'm not trying to like analyze you. That's not why I was asking that question. But
I'll Venmo you after this.
Billable hours.
Here's what I was going for. I was going for the following, that it's true that we understand that trauma can be incorporated, like in how one parents, or in kind of like those of us who become shrinks, have done a lot of work in understanding kind of like how our trauma from our childhood gets churned into the way that we want to care for others and so on and so forth. But here's the tricky part. There are domains so when we're talking about incorporating trauma, it's okay to incorporate it in your work, to incorporate it in your parenting. There's a variety of, but is it okay to incorporate it in your gender? Is it okay to incorporate it in how you have sex?
Yeah.
So,
well, and you know what? Because again, things I feel like every queer person is familiar with is the site, like less so these days, but I think all of us have run into that situation where it's like, you know, oh, you're coming out as gay, as a lesbian, as bisexual, as whatever. And it's like, oh, like what man hurt you, you know? Yeah. And like, and the reality of that being that like, for I think most of us, like the immediate knee-jerk defensive thing is like nobody, but like there are people for whom that's not true.
Absolutely.
Like there are people.
I'm like, Lee, yes, immediate knee-jerk reaction is yes, no man has ever hurt me. You're right. Yes.
Yeah, like in what universe does that happen?
Yeah. That would be
in a patriarchal society.
In a patriarchal society, there's never been a negative
have hurt us.
Yeah, I mean, but also just like, I mean, this is so not random, but if we're talking about trauma, I was like watching SVU earlier today, and it was like an episode about like a high school girl and like her experience with an older boy. And I'm like, teenage girls in like every culture, I feel like have experienced some sort of sexual trauma.
Right.
Like it, like even if it was not intended to be sexual trauma by the perpetrator. That's obviously why we've started this larger societal conversation about consent. But then how do we talk about it in a less black and white way?
Yeah.
But I am curious to hear what you have to say about like incorporating trauma into your sex life.
Well, I think this is kind of like where it gets very tricky. Like earlier when we were talking about how kind of like you take the risk to come out, but you kind of like hold on to something else, which is that kind of like there are certain narratives that we have that we hold on to for good reason. Because kind of like right now, for example, the attack on trans children that's unfolding on the legislative level throughout the country is partly organized through a discourse of trauma. Like the idea is these kids are not trans, they're traumatized, sometimes actually even by homophobia. And they're telling themselves that they're trans when in fact they're gay, right? Or they have been traumatized by some other way. And now they think they're trans mistakenly. So of course, that's absolutely not what I'm saying, right? But because there's kind of like this conservative forces politically are waiting there to pounce on queerness and to pounce on transness, we have trained ourselves to say things to each other, to say things publicly, and to actually believe that kind of like that being truly gay or being truly one's gender should have nothing to do with trauma. Yes, trauma can go in some directions, but not in these directions. So, for example, now I'm going to go less than vanilla Lee, if that's okay with you.
I'm ready. I'm feeling ready. I'm all warmed up.
Okay. Like somebody has had like a sexually abusive experience and now they like to do rape play, right? So if somebody has not, so you hear, for example, in the kink scene, obviously not everybody who's in the kink scene or who is into BDSM has been abused in some way, right? That needs to be said very explicitly. But why does that need to be said very explicitly? Because the anxiety is always, it's the same thing as with homosexuality and with trans. The anxiety is always that, oh, that's why you're like that. Because if you hadn't had that traumatic experience, you wouldn't have been twisted that way, because that's being twisted out of like what is natural is the reasoning, right? So of course we learn to think about trauma as something that when it comes to how we raise our children, what jobs we have, it can be incorporated. But when it comes to sex, it needs to be clean of trauma. And when it comes to gender, it needs to be clean of trauma. So that's the whole concept of traumatophilia that I'm working with, kind of like in the book. Like, what about, part of what I say is that, and I've seen this like both clinically and also in my social life, maybe this will resonate with you too in some ways, that traumatic experiences are also experiences that may be painful, but we're also attracted to our wounds and we want to touch them and get close to them and congregate around them, especially with other people. And those things can go well or not well. But it's not true that all we want to do is stay away from our trauma.
It's so interesting because I feel like I think you're saying it's like that's exactly what I was trying to like get to with this idea of like, oh, like no man made me this way, but it's like, I think the reality is that we like close the door on people's truths and people's stories, because at the end of the day, like what is the difference, right? If someone's into rape play, what is the difference between someone just being into that because they're like, I love to let go and like not have control and like that's exciting and like sexually satisfying for me, versus someone having that same desire because of some trauma that happened to them? Like, what is the difference, right? But I think that we exist in a society that treats those two things very differently, right? Like I feel like so many people are not going to look at those things and say like those are the same thing. Like one of them they'd be like, oh well sure, like that's like healthy rape play, right? And like the other one is like, oh, like you need to deal with your trauma, right?
Well,
and that's weird. Like and I think weird in the way that like I think some of what you talk about in the book is like, are we taking away people's ability to consent
to their own life, right?
Like to their own desires, and
by
life,
us telling them what's normal or what's weird,
or what's a good reason to do, and a bad reason to want the same thing, right?
I mean, the tricky thing is that let's take this scenario where there's somebody's doing rape play because they just like it, and somebody has some trauma, some sexual trauma. I think that people who have an issue with rape play, and by people here, I'm talking also about clinicians, right? Because I'm a clinician and I constantly have these conversations with my colleagues. They would say that person is traumatized too. You just haven't gotten to it yet. Or it's the trauma of patriarchy. I mean, if that's your framework, you're going to be looking for trauma, whether the other person claims it or not. I mean, that's what's happening with trans kids.
Dismissive thing in and of itself, right?
That's what's happening with trans kids right now. Like all trans kids, according to these clinicians and to these legislators, are traumatized, at the very least, by a culture that wants to transition them against their will, is how the logic goes, right?
Yeah. Well, and it's, the other thing that's like sitting up here in my mind while we talk, because we've come back to this idea a couple times, I think, in the context of consent, in the context of like that, it's fascinating because I think it gets into the same idea too of like, this idea of like consent to things that break you down a little bit, right? And that I think it's the reason that it's always interesting to me, because there's so many things going on right now around the country with like these concepts of like, bans on trans care for kids, and like, but even just to the point of like banning books, like banning drag queen story hours, right? Like all of these things. And it's like, I feel like we queer people, I think, talk about them a lot in the context of like, listen, like if your kid is gay, if your kid is trans, like they're going to be gay and they're going to be trans no matter what. But I also think a lot of us realize that like that's not necessarily true, right? And it's like part of the reason that you have to have these things and have them visible is I think all of us know that it's like, yeah, because you have to sometimes be able to like get past that idea of like what someone might consent to, right? Because if something sometimes has to push you past your comfort zone and past your own boundaries, and that might, could still be the thing that like saves that kid's life, even if they and or their parents would never have consented to them knowing that trans people exist, right? But like that is a part of it. Like it's not always just about knowing that like, yeah, the kid who's trans and knows that about themselves is going to go and find that book and that way they'll be okay. It's also about the kid who might not and might not otherwise have ever been willing to like examine that. But it's like it touches on this weird place if you're like, oh, but now you're talking about grooming. And it's like, well, no, but also like maybe, it's like a little bit of like, yeah, you kind of have to like let those ideas be out there. And like that might be in a way that like isn't consented to.
Sorry, I'm like also on the other side of that though. It's like, I think what you're saying like is not grooming. It's literally having them see every side.
Yes,
because
I don't think it's grooming.
I know it's not. I know you know it's not
grooming.
But I'm just saying, like, it's like we don't need to get too political with everything, but whatever. But like, it's the opposite where like you're like if like for the history of like conservative communities, they are saying here's the only thing that is right. Like that's
and I think that
to me is grooming.
Right. The reason that I think it's like sticking with me right now is because they play on the idea of consent a lot, right? Like there's a lot of conservative use of the idea of consent these days.
Yes.
That's dangerous. And it gets used in dangerous ways. And I think that like if you can see the possibility for danger in it there, of course there's a possibility of whether it's danger or even just
abuse.
Well, yeah, like abuse or even just like lacking, right? In other areas. Like it, yeah.
You're just saying like not as full of a life. That's what you're saying. When you say lacking.
Yes. Like, yeah. Of like missing, we've been talking
missing
about
out on experiences that you might not have had if you were like, well, I'm only going to do the things that are within this
that
box
are safe. Yes.
that I agreed to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think there are ways in which we are all more aware of the idea of consent as a limitation than we like to pretend otherwise sometimes in our most politically correct discourses.
Yeah. And certainly right now, as you were saying, right now, the whole idea about restricting, I mean, in the UK, they closed down the Tavistock Clinic and they closed it down because kind of like legally the decision, kind of like the whole debate legally was, can kids consent to hormone blockers? I mean, eventually the court said this is between kids and their doctors and their families. They're not a legislative issue, but the Tavistock Clinic closed anyway. So I think that you're right to point out that consent is kind of like in the way that it is talked about, it's an extremely conservative concept. And I think it's an extremely dangerous concept for queer life, especially. And trans kids is one example. But let's also go back to this question of like experiences that, when you were both saying there are ways in which as queers, we know that consent is more complicated. But what about kind of like, so one of the really challenging examples that I use in the book is the example of race play. So kind of like in the course of writing the book, I was approached by a Black activist who I interview and who talks to me about his experiences with wanting to be racially humiliated by a white woman. So then the question becomes, is this some kind of like interiorization of white supremacy? Is this some self-hatred? Like if somebody wants to be play raped, is there an equivalency there with race? And if not, why not? And here is where kind of like questions of consent begin to get more conservative. So kind of like I think the edgier the topic is and the harder it is the more conservative we become about consent. So
even as queer people, which I think is so
interesting. Yeah. I mean, this man was telling me about having gone to professional dominatrixes and asking them to racially humiliating them, white women, and they would say no.
Yeah.
And he would like, would you shit on me? And they would like, yes. but I won't call you racial slurs. So it's interesting, right? So it's interesting, like where it is that the line is drawn. And I mean, everybody draws a line wherever they want to draw it in their personal life or in their professional life or whatever. But conceptually, the issue is interesting in terms of consent.
Oh, man.
Yeah.
We went right in. We just
yes, I'm sorry. You can
40
take
minutes
out
into the episode. No.
You can take that out if you want.
We'll leave it in. It's just
absolutely not.
I mean, the point is
so
that it's hard for us to talk about, clearly.
Well, especially us as like two white people. But I think it's like the thing that is interesting about it to me is I think there are a lot of ways in which queer people understand the idea of pushing against norms and boundaries, and then there are ways in which we very much do not. Right. And sometimes in ways in which I feel like almost the queer community sometimes can be like even more aggressive about like self-policing ourselves.
Policing, yes. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And specifically because you are you almost can't get away from this kind of respectability game of like, like, oh yeah, sure, like we're queer people, but like we're the good queer people, like we're not the ones who are going to make you feel uncomfortable about stuff, like not too uncomfortable, like just like a little bit of discomfort.
but like I also think I like how we like talk about the queer community as just like, yes, everyone. It's so not. But like it also depends on like what part of the queer community you are being policed by.
Exactly.
Like there's certain parts of the queer community that would be like, you didn't go far enough in this radical discussion, or they would be like, you push the boundaries too much and like you're canceled. You know what I mean? Like there's like, and there's like all kinds of people in between.
But I think that that queer people as a whole, I'm going to make a blanket statement about your blanket statement. I do think that queer people as a whole, I think we tend to have a very strong idea of where your cis het white society places us on their discomfort scale. Do you know what I mean? I think we tend to know that it's like, okay, how's this for an example? Like Kelsey and I joke all the time that we are like, oh my God, yes, please introduce us to your like straight white Midwestern parents. Like we are gateway gays. We are like easy to digest, right? Like we're lesbians, but we're married and we're monogamous and we have children and we have like normal, like everyday jobs, right? Like we know where we stand on the scale of like where queer people fall on the cishet scale of like how uncomfortable will you make me feel about things.
Yes.
And we are nowhere near the level of like, oh yeah, like let's talk about like blurring lines of consent and rape play and like race play. Like we're, there's a distance between us and that. And we know that every queer person kind of knows where to put yourself on the scale of like, how much is this pushing against societal norms, right? Like, I think that's what I'm getting at, I guess.
But I would say also that different queers also have different levels of comfort with that pushing and different kinds of investments in exploring themselves and telling their own stories versus accommodating other people's discomfort, including queer people's. Like, we are not a homogeneous community by any means.
We're talking about ourselves in broad brush strokes, absolutely, and we're not. But I also, what I think is, and maybe as a next place to land on in the discussion, I do think it's what I hope, or what I think. What I love sometimes about the queer community is that I also think that like we tend to be more comfortable being the people to push those boundaries further and further out, right? And to be willing to face some of that discomfort within ourselves to make it easier for other people, I think, by then being comfortable. So I don't know where that lands us here, because I think consent is going to be it's a tough one. That's a tough one to like push up against. But I do think that there are benefits and reasons to doing so. And I think that like we tend to be better as a community at understanding that like we do put up boundaries on ourselves still, both as a community, as a society, and also as individuals, right? And I think that
I don't know. I think that we're also kind of like, depending on what experiences somebody has had, what their positional vulnerability is, definitely their race, their class. Like there's also like questions about safety, like, these kinds of the safety of like physical safety. Like, so there's, when I'm talking about this kind of consent, kind of like limit consent is what I call it. I'm not talking about the consent to another person. I'm talking about what risks one is willing to take for oneself. And that is dependent on so many things. I do think that subjects who have been minoritized by virtue of their sexuality, their gender, their race, their ability, are willing to take more risks for the most part for oneself, with oneself. But I'm definitely not talking about like kind of like me pushing somebody else or somebody else pushing me. I'm talking about what happens in this encounter where somebody kisses me because when I have not said don't kiss me, when kind of like they read the signs and they kiss me, and I'm like, whoa, like I didn't expect, forget about gender, I didn't expect kind of like there's all kinds of aspects in a kiss, like where somebody's hands are, like how tight kind of like how tight of a kiss, how long it lasts, I can come up with a variety of different dimensions of that, but you can imagine like there's that can open up to something else that you didn't anticipate. And then the question becomes, what do you do with that? So here's an example. Like I say this kind of like in the first chapter of the book, I talk about a gay couple that kind of like is in a bar, in a sex club, and they are, I think they're having sex in a sling, something like that, but they're having sex in a sling. And this man walks in and he's wearing a jock strap, and he's kind of like, it's dirty. He's kind of disgusting. He smells, his hair is greasy. And one of the guys in the couple is like, yeah, I want nothing to do with that. And he leaves. And the other guy who stays behind, who's my patient, and I write about this case with his permission, tells me that he totally does not see this coming, but he ends up having sex with this man. And he has like this spectacular experience where he feels like he's blown up in pieces. And he is entirely startled by what just happened. Like, first of all, I didn't think I was going to have sex with somebody who's that disgusting. B, what does this disgusting aspect have to do with this experience that I have? And now what do I do with myself? So this is not a violation. This is not, but it's also not something that he consented to in the sense of like he was planning on it. Some desire opens up in his body and he just goes with it.
Yeah. And I think that's the most important part, which I think we've been talking about, is like everything we're talking about with consent is we're not talking about violations, like direct violations of consent. Yeah. And I feel like that's clear.
I think the idea of what you like, I feel like it's the flip side of what you said at the beginning, right? That it's like safety is not a guarantee of like a good encounter or a satisfying encounter. I feel like the same thing, like encounters that happen beyond or outside the realm of consent are not a guarantee of a violation.
That's right. That's
like
right.
It's sort of it's allowing for this sense of like life is messy, right? Like I think so many of the things that you've said in this conversation kind of come down to like consent as the way that we treat it exists in this fantasy world where like everything is clear cut and black and white and known in advance and able to be prepped for and planned around and discussed and agreed to, and like that's not life. Like that's not how life is. And I think that there has to be those two things, right? That like safety doesn't guarantee your happiness and something happening without your consent isn't a guarantee that you won't enjoy it sometimes, right? Like whether it's like this is the best thing that's ever happened to me, or just like, oh, that happened, right? But I think that it's like that's a messy conversation. That's a messy conversation to have.
It is a messy conversation also because something that happens at the border of your consent could end up being problematic. It could end up traumatizing you or hurting you. And, that's part of the mess. So one of the examples in the book comes from the work of Tim Dean, who is this kind of like, he's a queer theorist, and he's also a gay man who describes his experience of having gone to, I want to say kink alert ahead for a moment, of having gone to a sex club. And he talks about how he does piss play. He never wants to bottom. He always wants to top. And in this particular night, this kind of like stranger kind of like pulls him back to the back of the bar. And now Tim Dean is giving him oral sex, he's giving him a blowjob. And he says, like, and then all of a sudden I feel my mouth is wet. And then I'm realizing, whoa, like this guy is pissing on me. And he says, I did not consent, and I would not have consented. But the orgasm that he experiences as a result of that moment that he realizes that this guy's pissing in his mouth, which he would not have agreed to had he been asked, is extraordinary.
Yeah.
So here's the messy part, which is that if he were talking to me as a therapist after the fact, and he was saying, look, he didn't ask me, he just started pissing in my mouth, I had no interest in that. Like, I feel, how am I ever going to go back and trust into a leather bar, like trust another man to pull me in the back and like give him a blowjob? I'm never doing that again. I would be like, I get it. I wouldn't be like, why are you taking it this way? I would understand why somebody would be feel violated, just like I understand why he happens to have felt kind of like what he describes as erotic astonishment, this experience of erotic astonishment. And that's the messy part, that it could go well, it could not go well.
It is the messy part. It's also the part that I think I want to push back on my idea that sometimes I think the queer community can help. Normalize is not the right word. I don't know what the right word I want to use here is. But I think because here's where I think this all seems fascinating to me. And also because maybe some of this is just me, that I'm like, I am an extremely vanilla person, but like I actually don't mind talking about any of this. I'm like fascinated by all of this. I think it's super cool. Because to me, the idea that like I've always felt like, for me as a queer woman, like I understand that to me, like the concept of being attracted to men seems wild, like seems outside of like my understanding. But I also know that like there's a ton of straight people out there somehow, bafflingly, they're still there, right? and so I think it helps to, again, normalize is not the right word. It helps to like make sense of it, to be like, okay, well, but I guess that must be a thing because like people seem to be into it, right? Which like for me, same with piss play. I'm like, listen, not my thing, but like people are into it. Like, go you, good for you. What I think is fascinating to me about this is like we talked about, okay, let's go back to like our step one. You kiss a girl who thinks she's straight, right? Like if that goes wrong, that's still going to feel like a violation. It's still violating consent. But I also think that we as a society have accepted that it's like, oh, but sometimes people kiss you and you're not into it. And like, that's okay. Like
it depends where you are. Like there's parts of the countries where that could get you killed. It depends on the situation. Absolutely. Yeah. But I think that like most people, you would expect that their reaction to like, oh my God, some girl kissed me and I didn't want them to, is going to be very different than their reaction to like, some dude pissed in my mouth while I was going down on him and I didn't consent to it. But they're both issues of consent, right? Like the scales are different. The risk is different. For sure. But I think they're both getting at the same idea, which is like sometimes that risk goes well and it's allowed to go well. Whether or not it's every time and whether or not that's always going to make it okay and whether taking the risk is the right choice or not, that is not for us to say, I think, in this conversation or in any conversation necessarily. But I think it's, to me, I can see the parallels between them, right? At least in terms of like how it relates to this conversation. And I think that there is a sense of, there are things that we, I think, have accepted more as a society because you see them more often, right? And that's what I think I mean by that, is just like, I think there are ways that like we as queer people can probably or could be more open to this idea of like consent is messier than we want it to be right now.
because I think we do understand that there are lots of times where like something has challenged our sense of our own boundaries, and sometimes there's a payoff to that, right?
Sometimes.
And again, it is hard to have this conversation where it's like, it feels like you're saying like, so it's okay, people, like just violate boundaries left and right.
No,
I'm like, that's not it.
No, not at all.
That's not at all what the conversation is. But I think it is allowing for a sense of messiness that like I don't think is still out there a lot. But I feel like if it's going to come from somewhere, my expectation would be I would see it in queer communities first, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. And I was thinking, I think to your point about kind of like the preparedness to play with these ideas, I think it's reasonable to assume that it could be more expectable in queer people, just because there's already been a play with risking some aspects of belonging to mainstream society, taking risks of placing oneself outside in order to be where one needs to be. And then it also, like, so much, I'm an immigrant. I grew up in a different country. So I'm very aware of how different things are. Like in Greece and in Cyprus, very different things can happen. Even in parts of this country, like kissing somebody who doesn't want to be kissed, or who wants to be kissed, but doesn't want to be the person who got kissed by a man, it can get you killed. So, the stakes are like, obviously we are not downplaying these stakes. But I do want to look back to something else you said when you said, I don't know why people would be attracted to men. And I was wondering if you know Jane Ward's book. Do you know Jane Ward's book, The Tragedy of Heterosexuality?
Oh, I'm going to need to look it up.
Uh-huh. I mean, it is written by this lesbian author who addresses straight women and talks to them about that in a way that is brilliant and also very funny.
That sounds right up my alley, because I say it all the time. I'm just like, it makes no sense to me, and yet I know it must be true. I see it
Read
enough,
the book. I have a question for you before we sort of wrap up, which is like, we have been painting some broad strokes. I'm curious if you've had any response from people within the community, or even from people not within the community, who have heard maybe a podcast episode or have read the book. Like, what has the response been from people who are actually engaging with the content? Yeah,
thank you for that question. It's a really beautiful question. I was expecting much more pushback around these ideas. I've heard from a lot of people feeling relieved to be able to talk about consent in this more complicated way, and feeling both excited and a little bit frightened about what it opens up, precisely because it opens up kind of like when we say risk, we don't say, ooh, risk, it's sexy risk. No, it's also like dangerous risk and kind of like difficult risk, and the risk of offending somebody or hurting somebody or feeling hurt. And I've had really interesting conversations with people both from communities that engage in these practices and not around race play. And that has been very interesting, precisely because it's so edgy and so difficult and so connected to racial history, the racial history of this country in particular.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Well, and also because I would imagine, because that's, I think a lot of this really, to me at least, it comes down to the same idea of it's like, it's not so much that I hesitate to talk about like more things because I'm like a very vanilla person. I just don't feel qualified. And I think my guess would be a lot of people also are gonna like hesitate to dive into like the nitty-gritty mess of racial issues. Because that's again, in the way that a lot of things I think are more fraught with peril these days. Like that's a easy way to get to say something that's going to not, not be received well in the context of like the country we live in and like where our racial politics are still today. Yeah, that's that's a risk I wouldn't take either, realistically. Yes. Because that's just it's there's like so I'm talking like, my little T trauma of childhood and like how that influences my parenting. That's that's big trauma.
Yeah.
Like that's like a much bigger beast to try to.
And I should say that, when I
on.
talk about race play in the book, I also talk from my experience with people, somebody I've interviewed, and with a play that I'm working with. So I think of course it's incredibly important to be aware of one's positionality in having these conversations.
Yeah.
Is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners about your book, or anything before we get to our Q&A?
I would just say that, like if anybody wants to reach out, if anybody reads the book and wants to talk, or has kind of like thoughts they want to share, like I'm interested in hearing from people, so I'm open to that. And I read reviews that are posted online, so wherever people read their reviews, like I'm happy to engage. And thank you for being like open for this conversation, for going kind of like meandering with me around the book. Thank you.
I think it's a great conversation. I'm so glad we had it.
Me too.
All right, we're going to head into our Q&A.
Q and gay.
Question number 1. Have you ever enjoyed an experience you did not explicitly consent to? A, yes, or B, no?
Yes.
Great. Easy. Okay. We're gonna do these.
Who is that going to be a no for?
True.
You know what?
You never
know.
You never know.
Okay.
Someone out there.
Okay.
Okay. Question 2. Where do you find it most important to set boundaries? A, with others, B, with yourself, or C, both?
I think it's different sets of, I would say C, but it's different kinds of ways of thinking about boundaries.
Okay.
I know, complicated multiple choice questions, but here we go.
I know. It's a complicated topic.
Question number 3. Where has dealing with your own trauma come up most in your life? A, therapy, B, parenting, C, friendships, or D, sexuality?
You're asking me now?
Yes.
Or you can say, don't want to.
It's a multiple choice. You don't have to expand if you don't want to.
Yes. I think I'm going to go with E, like I'm bailing out of this one.
Okay, that's fair. That's also fair. You as the guest get to make up your own answers in ways that our Twitter poll users do not. Question 4. When you look back at your life, does it make more gay sense? Yes or no?
Yes.
Beautiful.
More queer sense. Yes.
Yes.
Question number 5, final question. What is most important to you? A, safety, B, excitement, C, pleasure, or D, surprise?
E, experience.
Ooh,
nice.
I like that.
All the write-ins.
I know. These are good write-ins this time. Well, again, as we were saying, this
very
is
complicated multiple choice questions.
They're hard multiple choices.
I can see that.
Yes. Remember, all of you out there, you can give us your own answers to this episode's Q&A questions on our Twitter at Lez Hang Out Pod. Thank you so much for hanging out with us today. This was a beautiful conversation.
We've had a blast, Avgi. Can you let our listeners know where they can find you on social media, where they can find the book, all of that?
Yeah. I mean, the book is nyupress.com is the best way to get it directly from the publisher, and wherever you get your books in like small bookshops and local bookstores. I am on Instagram at AVGOLIS98, Avgolis 98. And if you follow me on Instagram and you want to write to me, and I'll write back.
Love it.
Amazing.
Thank you so
much.
much.
And I know you were just telling us a little off mic real quick. You have another book coming up. Is that something you want to let our listeners know about as well?
Sure. I have another book coming up with my co-author, Dr. Anne Pellegrini. The book is called Gender Without Identity. It builds actually on some of the ideas that we talked about today about trauma, to think about how we might understand queerness as being also refracted through trauma, not as a way of invalidating, but as a way of helping it flourish and articulate its textures.
Love it.
Thank you so much for kind of like playing with ideas with me.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Let me hear you say hip, 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 well, yeah.
We love hearing from all of you, and we love continuing to build this community. So we just like to shout out some of our favorite things every episode. And this week, we want to start with a shout out to someone who reached out on Instagram at Togs1 and wanted to recommend Gillian Anderson playing a canonically bisexual character in The Fall, where I hear she doesn't. It's not like I don't think it's primarily about her being bisexual, but I think she's got some good chemistry going on with some other characters, and we will take Gillian Anderson playing canonically queer
anytime,
any day. So
in anything she's ever in.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to check out The Fall. Thank you for the recommendation. This is the content that we're looking for. Yeah.
Also want to shout out Kate, who sent us an email. Kate is actually an old piano student of mine and said she started internet stalking me, which this also cracks me up because I was like, as I was teaching piano lessons in general, like I was doing Lez Hang Out, I was like, any of these people could easily
could Google you
like
in a heartbeat.
Google me. Like I was more like not concerned, but I was like, are the parents gonna be like listening to me talk about gay shit or whatever? And of course, like my students cyber stalked me, found Lez Hang Out, listened to a bunch of episodes, and then realized she was gay. So hey Kate, you're welcome. You are welcome.
Happy to have you, Kate. Glad you found us.
So happy you found us. Loved The Flame, which, like, of course she did. I remember we would, like, work on a lot of musicals in our piano lessons. So, of course, like, loves the musicals. And one of my favorite things about her email was that she learned how to play guitar to impress a girl. And I'm like, yes, Kate, you are for sure gay.
Relatable content.
Relatable. As always, I want to thank our Lesbian Jesus patrons, Mark Foster,
Tanya Ferguson,
Alana Rosen,
Lizette Stye,
Adi Benitez,
Fiona W.,
and Sophia Phillips.
And our King Princess patrons, Amy and Ellen,
Leah Henley,
Andrea Doucette,
and Julia Gonzalez. Thank you all so much for supporting the show. We could not make it without you.
Remember, you can also find us on all the social medias. We are on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and TikTok at Lez Hang Out Pod.
You can email us at lezhangoutpod@gmail.com.
You can check out our website at lezhangoutpod.com.
Whatever app you use for podcasts, make sure you subscribe so you'll be the first to know when new episodes drop.
We also have videos going up on our YouTube channel. You can subscribe at youtube.com/lezhangoutpod to catch those.
Lez Hang Out is an independently produced show hosted by us with audio production by me. Our production assistant is Kristen Murison and Twitter shenanigans by Lee Holmes Foster.
If you want to help support our little independent team, the first thing you can do is leave us a rating and a review on whatever app you use to listen to podcasts. It helps new people find the show.
If you want to support us financially, you can join our Patreon at bit.ly/lezpatreon. That also gives you access to all of our bonus episodes, including our most recent episode on Loving Annabelle, featuring our friend Abby Nissenbaum. You are not going to want to miss that one. You can join that at bit.ly/lezpatreon.
If you want to get some Lez Hang Out swag, we have all of our designs and all of our merch in our TeePublic store. You can get those designs on all sorts of stuff. We got tank tops for the summer that is coming up. We got t-shirts. We got sweatshirts if you're still a little chilly. You can find all that at bit.ly/lezshop.
We are an all-weather lesbian shop. And remember, we have a queer production company making queer podcast musicals with guaranteed happy endings. You can find everywhere at $Prod.
You can also check out our website, dollarbeanproductions.com.
You can listen to all the episodes of our first show, The Flame, on any podcasting app.
And if you want to help support us in making more musicals, we are getting through so many recording sessions for our next show, Journey to the Heart. We are so excited for everyone to see what we've been working on. If you want to help support us, you can join our Patreon at bit.ly/dollarbeanpatreon.
If you want to find us individually, you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at Ellie Brigida.
And you can find me on Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok at LSH Foster.
With that, I'm Ellie.
And I'm Lee.
And let's hang out again soon.
Let's hang out.